Welcome to Fascism on Film. I'm James Kent, and along with me is Teal Minton. Hi, Teal.
Hello. How are you today?
I'm doing fine. I don't know why we're laughing. Hey, so we're getting close to the end here at Fascism on Film. End of season 2, not the end of the show. And
you scared me for a minute there.
It's okay. It's a scary time. And so if you haven't been catching up on the episodes, you can go to fascismonfilm.com. And we're also on Apple Podcasts and other podcast areas. So you can try to catch up. And we will be, finishing season 2, and then we will get on to season 3 in short order, early in 2026. Teal, if people wanted to reach out, just give us a shout out, or if they have any suggestions for films that they would love to hear us discuss on the show, that would be great too. We do have an email address or two, right?
Yes, we do. We're at fascismonfilm@gmail.com, and there's also a contact form on our website, fascismonfilm.com. You can click on contact there and write us a message. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, one of the films that kind of kicked this whole thing off a long time ago was the film Mr. Klein. And that was a recommendation from a listener of our other show stuff we've seen. So, we've seen a lot of these movies, but that doesn't mean we've seen them all. And if you've got a suggestion, it may be something we've seen and we just haven't gotten to it yet because, there's a lot of movies about fascism.
We have a pretty big list we're working from and that we're chipping away at. So we will get to some of those. People are excited to hear about Jojo Rabbit. We will be doing that at some point.
Yeah, I think we're going to try to get that done on season 3. And that was another thing with Inglourious Bastards. I think when we were originally putting together season 2, we'd given it one thought, and then we know that's a film that people are interested in, and we may not think of it ourselves as like kind of the most important film about fascism, but it's something that adds, flavor or whatever to the whole thing. And if that's what gets you interested in listening to an episode, we're going to put it out there. And it's done. A lot of people are listening to that particular episode. And we're hopeful that people will also check out some of the more obscure movies that we're talking about, because I think the obscure ones we've chosen because they really focus on fascism and different aspects. And I don't think the next film that we're going to be talking about today is so obscure, though it took me almost a lifetime to watch it. And now it's one of my favorite films ever. I think it's so great.
Me too. We're talking about A Special Day from 1977, directed by Ettore Scola. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
I think you've done a pretty good job. I mean, he was an Italian master of comedy cinema for years, and then kind of out of nowhere and really out of theme for him, he does this movie that I guess it has some humorous elements to it, but
it does. Yeah,
it's a really serious subject matter handled in a deft way. It's, to me, an amazing film of direction and writing and acting.
And so he's sort of going against type coming out of comedy, and it was the same for the leads. Sophia Loren and Marcello Mastroianni, they were the romantic comedy duo, and they were good-looking and funny, and then they played against type for this movie. And so it was, for everyone, was kind of coming out of that comedy world and making something more serious. And you're right, it does have some lightness in it. There is some humor in the film at times, but I think that that's because it's such a human portrait that it would be it would ring false if it was just all depressing.
I think in this film, if you really weren't somebody that followed the films of Sophia Loren and Marcello Mastroianni, after this film, you're going to say, oh, I got to see more because Marcello Mastroianni is very charming in this particular movie. He's seductive in a way, but it's also a film that is a great example of life under fascism because it takes place in Italy on a very special day.
Yeah, it was the day that Hitler and Mussolini were meeting. Hitler came to Italy, and there were lots of parades and rallies and speeches and bands playing, and it was a huge event. And that's set up in the first 5 minutes of the film with documentary footage. And then we settle into this apartment building, and everyone there is on their way out to see this parade and to see Hitler and Mussolini. Everyone's super excited about it, getting dressed up, and left behind in the apartment complex are this housewife and this man who's played by Marcello Mastroianni, Gabriele. And I think he's sort of on house arrest, and he's left in the apartment building, and she's left there to sort of clean up after her family and do the laundry and those sorts of housewife type things. And they meet and they have this very special day of bonding, arguing, and finding each other as people in this moment.
Yeah, I mean, she's what would be considered an ordinary housewife. And in Italy, she didn't have a lot of rights. I mean, women in Italy at the time could not vote. And she has a very strong, overbearing husband who's in the Mussolini administration. And she could have gone, right? We find out through the course of the film that she is actually a big Mussolini fan, and she even has a scrapbook, right, of his goings. But she's kind of not allowed by the husband to go, that she's got too many chores to do at home, so she stays home, even though I think she would have liked to have participated.
Yeah. And there is a line where somebody says, "Oh, you're not going? Oh, that's right. You don't have domestic help." And so it's sort of, there's a little bit of a class issue too, and she's being left behind. And it's part of the whole fascist ideal that Mussolini was pushing, was that the family is sort of at the core of fascism. And so like when he looks at that scrapbook, the first quote he sees is a Mussolini quote about how women are responsible for the hearth. And she also mentions at some point that she has 5 or 6 kids and one more, and she'll get the special bonus from the government. And so her role as a housewife is fulfilling the fascist vision.
Interesting. In contemporary times, there's a push by current administration to say, have more kids. And it's like that ideal of fascism creeps its way in. And then Mastroianni, the reason they get together is she has a bird that gets loose, and it flies across the courtyard over to his window, and he helps get the bird back.
Yes, and he's sitting alone in his apartment considering suicide. And we don't know why exactly at that point in the film, but he has a gun and he's considering suicide. And then she shows up and interrupts him and starts this day between them. And getting the bird back is the first thing. The bird is just, I think, maybe a kind of an obvious metaphor for her being trapped in a cage and then escaping and flying around, having a little freedom, and then going back in the cage again.
Yeah. And one of the challenges in this movie is, how are you going to get these two characters from two different worlds? How are you going to keep getting them brought together so that they can have, these conversations, et cetera? And that's what I think, could feel very much like a play in the wrong hands. But in these hands, everything kind of works really well. And again, Mastroianni's character is so charming. And the effect it has on the viewer is that you love this guy. He's such a great guy. Who could not like this guy? And that's by design, because eventually you'll discover, and I think you'll as an audience kind of learn this before Sophia Loren does, kind of, because she's a little bit clueless, is that he's gay, his character. And so that is interesting on many levels, because in Italy, a very macho society, being gay, obviously, at that time, and even for many years later, was frowned upon, and it was illegal. However, until things got cemented between Hitler and Mussolini, there wasn't a huge crackdown on men who were gay.
There was a little bit. There was a crackdown sort of on even on single men, vagrants, and homosexuals were part of that. But it really, they weren't going out and tracking people down. But his problem is that he has essentially a government position. He's a radio announcer. And so he is a public person, and that is why this being gay is a problem for him and why it's a problem for them. And they end up firing him from his radio announcer job. He initially says to her that it's because his voice wasn't masculine enough, but then he eventually admits that it's really just because he's gay.
Yeah, and so historically, as Italy started to align more and more with Hitler, and there was sort of like this need to kind of appease Hitler and their even more strict version of fascism, that they started cracking down more and more. And there was this thing where, you could go to a doctor, it seems crazy, and get kind of a medical card that said you weren't gay.
Exactly. Which he says he tries to show them when they're firing him, but that it actually makes it worse because most straight people don't walk around with a certificate saying they're straight.
Yeah, and that was sort of their first kind of foray into cracking down. But eventually they started rounding up gay men and sending them off to these sort of penal colonies, these prisons out on these islands, right?
In Sardinia, yeah.
Yeah. And so there is some historical basis for the kind of building of this story. And very loosely, his character was based on a radio announcer who was sent to Sardinia. And, cutting to the chase of the end of the movie, that's kind of what he's been waiting around for. There are men that are coming to take him away, where he will go to this island prison. And that's what we don't really find that out to the very end. And whether or not Sophia Loren's character kind of figures that out when she sees him leaving with the men at the end, it's a little bit vague, but I think it's all coming together where, she's had an education throughout the day and suddenly her eyes are open, I think.
Yeah, her eyes are open, but she's still trapped in this domestic this sort of prison that she's in where she doesn't really have the same rights as everyone else. And when everyone comes back from the parade, they're all sitting around the table talking about it like it was a sporting event. They're all super enthusiastic. And her husband is complaining that there's a cold dinner and she's just been lazing around all day.
And we've talked about this movie before. We did talk about it on our show Stuff We've Seen. Talking about it again, I think mostly because it's such a great film and new people might be listening to the show. And I think it has so much to say about the human condition. Also just kind of injustice, right? How insane fascism was. And that, again, you get to know these characters and it really is kind of, sometimes it's these little simple films that don't show violence and don't have all those trappings that kind of hit home the most, that you don't know at the end of the movie, like what the future is going to be for either of them. I mean, what's interesting is Sophia Loren's character, her husband is within the government. You know that the regime's going to fall and that post-war Italy is going to go plunging into awfulness. And so, you kind of wonder, wow, I wonder what happens to Sophia Loren and her character and her family. And then you're also wondering, wow, I wonder if Marcello Mastroianni makes it out of this prison, because there were a lot of people that died there, but many did make it out of the prison afterwards. And the fact that you even start thinking about those things, it tells you just how much you care for these characters.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you really do care. I feel so bad for her being trapped there, but at the same time, I think, well, she's totally buying into it and she is a fascist. She really is a fascist. And she really, she has mixed feelings about him being gay. And there's another thing that's going on in this movie is there's somebody else who's left behind at the apartment building, who's the concierge, and she's this old woman who's very nosy and is sort of keeping track of what they're doing during the day. And she comes to the Sophia Loren character and says, "This guy, she knows he's in the apartment having coffee with her." And she says, "This guy is bad news, and it's better to be alone than be in bad company." And she says, yeah, he's an anti-fascist. And this it riles up Sophia Loren a little bit. You can see that she's a little bit disturbed by the idea that he might be an anti-fascist. And he isn't really. And he has this amazing line where he says, I don't think I'm an anti-fascist. If anything, I think fascism is anti-me. And it's that kind of very personal thing that this film gets at. It's not showing us the parades or the violence and the torture or what's going on in the camp he goes to. It's about just day-to-day life and how the fascist structure invades on our most intimate spaces and really affects who we are as people in these very, very intimate ways.
Well, for a woman who is pro Mussolini and proclaims that she's a fascist, though that some of the actions and things that go on throughout the day, it makes you question whether or not she really believes that. But the thing is, when you bring up this concierge, there is this understanding that you're being watched at all times, and that
Yes.
a doorbell ring can be ominous, and that you don't want the doorbell to your apartment ringing. And yet,
Yes.
so you're being pro Mussolini and pro fascist, but yet at the same time, you're afraid of it. What was really happening. And this concierge is a constant reminder that someone's there ready to report you for what they might see as, anti-fascist behavior.
Yeah, and that it's at that level. It's at every level of society. So it's not like you're worried about a bunch of soldiers coming in. You're worried about the woman down the hall. And so that sense of paranoia that infects our everyday life is there. And the other thing is, you were mentioning the constant presence of the concierge. And I think one thing that is really important about this film is the constant presence of the radio. And the radio is covering the parades and the rallies. And so there's a newscaster that comes in throughout the film repeatedly. Sometimes in the middle of scenes, you hear this voice coming in talking about how great the Nazis and the fascists are and how they're working together. And we get the music from the marches. There's a point at which Gabriele is dancing the rumba, and a march, sort of a martial march, comes in over the radio and drowns it out. And he says, "Oh, well, you can't dance to that." And the film is filled with lines like that, right? Like, you can't dance to fascism, essentially.
Yeah, it's another thing I just found fascinating in the film is the Sophia Loren, whose character's name is Antonietta. Her husband, Emanuele, he is played by an American actor, John Vernon, and he's just dubbed in. But his character, he's really kind of a despicable guy. We don't spend too much time with him, but it's pretty clear that he is a womanizer,
Hmm.
and he treats her like dirt, and he's just really like the focus of the family. He kind of sucks all the oxygen out of the room whenever he's there.
Totally. And there's this amazing shot at the beginning of the film where we come out of the courtyard into their window of their apartment, and the camera, I think it's like a 7 or 8 minute shot, right? Where it follows her around, waking everyone up, getting everyone ready to go to the parade. Her husband is angry that she's waking him up, and also angry that she didn't wake him up earlier. And in this scene of the family, we see everyone sort of conforming to these different gender roles. And like, the son is sort of drawing on a mustache, and then she finds that he has some porn, and he's like, "Oh, well, my dad gave it to me." And so there is this macho sense of the male role in the family is very dominant, and then the daughters are sort of following them along.
There's also, is it that same kid? He has like a comic, and it's one of those really like creepy racist comics.
Yes. She picks it up to read at one point.
There's all these very little subtle things that are baked into this movie that kind of give you that feeling of just like, here, this is a day in the life of a family that lives under fascism.
Yeah.
And you had mentioned this opening scene, and it's funny, there are a lot of American films and films in general that people talk about that have these amazing one-take shots.
Yeah.
And here's a film that a lot of people don't know about. It's kind of, I don't want to say it's forgotten. I think film people really know this movie. This film has one of the most spectacular one-take shots of all time.
Yes, it absolutely is. I didn't do a good enough service when I was introducing it, but it is an absolutely stunning shot.
Well, like on Criterion, I watched some of the ancillary things on Criterion Channel on this, and I mean, this was a technical marvel to pull off. I mean, we're talking like, the late 70s. We're not talking about times where you have computerized cameras or
motion control and
CGI and like building like, oh, half of the building is, a green screen and doing this stuff. No, this thing, they had like gaffers and grips and people like pulling the camera in and then grabbing it so that they could continue it. And then it's so insane because it's subtle. And so at first you don't really think about the fact that the camera hasn't cut and the fact that they went from the bottom of a courtyard all the way up to the top of where they live in through their window and then continuing in through the apartment. I mean, it's pretty amazing stuff.
And it almost feels like there's cuts in it because it's so well done. And it's also just sort of this amazing thing. We're introduced to the courtyard and it's got a fascist flag and a swastika. It's sort of adorned for the day. And then we go from there into the apartment and it's like the fascism is invading the apartment coming in through the window.
They take an actual critical moment in history, this time when Hitler comes to Italy. And it may have been the only time that he did come to Italy, I think. From that on, the fates were sealed. And it's after they formed a tight pact when they began to ship, and I'm saying Italy began to ship their Jewish population to concentration camps. It didn't happen really before that, but it did happen after. And it may have still been a little bit of time. It got worse after the initial fall of Mussolini, and then he went to prison, and briefly the country felt liberated, but then the Germans kind of went in and took over the country. And at that point, that's when they really took control of deporting the Jewish population in mass. So, there's a lot of fascinating things behind the scenes, kind of packaged up in this very interesting little story. And also kind of interesting, when we talk about fascism, there are not a lot of movies that focus on the effects of the gay population.
Yeah, there really aren't.
You know that they were persecuted and sent to concentration camps, but we don't have a ton of films that deal with it. There is a documentary that I've seen, and I think it's on Netflix, that talks about Italy's role in rounding up gay men and putting them in these prisons. That's one thing that I've seen, but there is not a ton of stuff.
That's very interesting. Yeah, and it really was, like you said, it wasn't until later that they started shipping out the Jewish population. But prior to that, they were really going after these other categories: single men and women, criminals, vagrants, homosexuals. Everyone was sort of taken away and confined in these work camps.
There's a documentary called El Dorado, Everything the Nazis Hate. And that's a documentary about the gay nightlife in the Weimar Republic and how the Nazis squashed that. So that is also something that you could check out. I've seen that.
And that's also a great companion to Cabaret.
That's a great companion for Cabaret. We should have mentioned it when we did that episode. So some of the island prisons were Ustic, Lampedusa, and San Domino, sorry. And then San Domino was Italy's exclusive sort of devil's island for gay men. Newspapers, I guess, never mentioned them, but when the men were sent there, they really didn't have any kind of due process. So I think that the San Domino is where Marcello Mastroianni's character was being sent.
What's interesting about his character is that he knows this is happening from the beginning of the movie. He knows this is sort of his last day, and he's getting his affairs in order and giving away his books and talking to his friends. But he does accept his fate. He doesn't fight back. He doesn't scream and yell. He doesn't try to escape the people that are coming to get him. He accepts it and he goes with them. And that is just so powerful. It's not what we usually see in movies. We often see people trying to fight back or being upset about these things, and he just accepts it.
Well, he does and he doesn't. I mean, he was going to kill himself.
He was going to kill himself. Yes, I guess that's not accepting it. But he finds through her, he finds kind of a reason to live a little bit.
Yeah. And so there's a couple other little things before we end this episode, and I think that maybe this was a concession in that it was a big thing at the time to have, Marcello Mastroianni, this man's man playing a gay man, because movies by and large didn't mention homosexuality at all, and especially in Italian cinema, but they do make love. She actually tries to seduce him and it doesn't work. But then later, and they do have sex. And so that was the one note of the film that I think the more I've seen the film, I accept that, but it did feel like maybe it was a way to appease people that could not accept that any woman, could be irresistible to Marcello Mastroianni. But there's something that I want you to talk about. I think it's important because it ties into this idea of Antonietta being a prisoner. Gabriele gives her this copy of the Three Musketeers.
Yes.
And then, of course, she reads it. And there's a lot of subtext there on the Three Musketeers that I think ties into like the overarching theme. But at the end of the movie, when she sees him going away, she picks up the book and is reading it.
And she's very reluctant to take the book at first. And we ultimately learn it's because she's uneducated and is probably not very good at reading.
And I think that's another, it's like, again, this movie doesn't hit you over the head, but it leaves you with these breadcrumbs that says, that people who didn't have a lot of education were more likely to fall under the spell of fascism or authoritarianism in one form or another.
Yeah, and I think that's another really important thing about this movie is that, it's not like she's being oppressed. I mean, she is. She is being oppressed. But she's kind of on board with it. And that we see this sort of nationalistic enthusiasm, not just from her family, but from her a little bit too. She's bought into the party line.
Thinking of her age and the time that is, I mean, probably since she was like a teenager, fascism was there and she knows nothing really else.
Some of the films we do on the show, I feel like are really good about fascism, but this is one that is really good about fascism and also an amazing cinematic experience. And so I highly recommend this film, not just to learn about fascism, but just as a movie. That said, I think it really teaches us some things and shows us some things about the impact of fascism on us personally that we don't see in a lot of the movies that are maybe more about war or the violence or people being taken and disappeared and tortured. And yes, he's disappeared at the end of the movie, of course, but there's all these little details in these photographs on the radio that sort of show that fascism is this constant presence in your life when you live under it, and that it affects everything, your friendships, your neighbors, how you see yourself. It gets under your skin in this really intense way. It's not just a bunch of scary guys with guns putting you in the back of a car. It's there in the fabric of everyday life.
The next film, which will be our last film of the season, I can't believe we're already at the end of season 2, is a film that kind of piggybacks on this. It's not specifically fascist. However, it's a film about life under an authoritative dictatorship, and it's based on a true story. It's a movie that came out at the end of last year. It's a Brazilian film called I'm Still Here. It's a movie that you need to go and check out and watch. It's pretty powerful, and I think that more than any film that I've seen in recent times, it's the film that most reminds me of kind of the feeling I get of what's been going on in our own country. Maybe not to this level, but at the same time, there may be some people in our country that have experienced similar things that are going on in that film. And so I feel like it resonates to me, and I'm excited to talk about it. And we will talk about it on the last episode of season 2 of Fascism on Film. So I'm James Kent, and as always, teal is teal.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Bye.